Welcome, everybody, to The Challenge. This is John Chapman. I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, and it's good to be with you today. We are here for another podcast on this 8th day of May, enjoying everything that's been given to us, and yet taking parts of the news and wanting to have some discussions and ask some questions about what's going on. Today, I'd heard something on the news here a couple of days ago, and I thought this was interesting that it made it to the news. And so I'm thinking this is an interesting conversation, because when secular news reports something like this, perhaps there is an impact that's greater. Because very often, those in the church, we have a tendency to think our lives are over here, and the world's life is over there. And this conversation today, I think, needs to happen because we are actually looking at that. I don't think you can separate the two. They might be two different ideals, but you can't separate the impact of both of those happening there. So for those of you tuning into the station or getting a chance to listen to this too, enjoying the opportunity of having my brother Glenn Chapman is with us today. Glenn, glad to have you on board again today. Welcome, brother. There you are. We were talking about that it is that the Methodist Church, I'm going to read the headline. I'm going to read the headline here to this article that I read, and I'd heard this on the news earlier, and it says Methodists, that being I assume the denomination, Methodists end anti-gay bans, closing 50 years of battles over sexuality for mainline Protestants. And I got to tell you, I read that and I went, oh my gosh, I'm not, that is pretty crazy. But when you had an opportunity, Glenn, what were your thoughts when you heard that the Methodist Church was, and by the way, we have these discussions here on the podcast. We are bringing back both religion and politics to the dinner table. So even if you're not at the dinner table, we're bringing this heat to you. So what are some of the first things that entered into your mind, Glenn, when this was reported that this was happening with the Methodist Church?
Well, it's not uncommon. It seems like a lot of churches, if you want to call them that, kind of waffle back and forth between these various schemes, and it's kind of like a lot of other things in politics here in the United States and at the state level and other things. It doesn't really matter even what the membership wants or what they think is right or wrong, or in the case of the church, what the book actually teaches. It's a matter of what kind of some select individuals at the top just dictate on everybody else and call it good. And that's the part that's just unusual. This started some time ago throughout the church groups, and it just kind of works its way through. And there's a million reasons why they give it their opinion. This is the way it should be. But it's just a strange phenomenon, because you would think that either A, you don't believe the teaching of the Bibles, and so therefore you're not interested in following, Jesus or Christianity or any religion for that matter, and B, saying, okay, as a result of that, I'm just going to do my own thing and call it my own thing. But the fact that this is so strongly being pushed to merge the two together is just strange. And there's obviously something else behind it.
And I think when you say that, Glenn, there's obviously something else behind it. That's the questions I think we want to tackle today. That's awesome. What we want to get after today. This does seem odd. And what's the merger of that? I want to read. This is interesting to me because, for those who go to church, attend church, fear God, have a basic fundamental ideal there. You might say, well, this is not a big deal, or maybe you're within that church, because we've seen the Lutheran Church tackle this idea. We see the Methodist Church tackle this idea. My understanding, this spreading all over within church congregations. There's been inklings of. I even saw a smart article of the assemblies of God having discussions around this.
Right.
And they're generally considered more conservative in their values, even some of these other denominations. So you're going, why is this? I want to read this paragraph from this article because I find it interesting, their take on it. And this, I think it opens up the door for us to understand a little bit more how this comes about, because very often, if you consider the Catholic Church, for example, before I read this paragraph, if you consider the Catholic Church, most people would say, the Catholic Church is their own. They do what they're going to do. And when there were
Hmm.
scandals going on within the Catholic Church and biblical principles are needing to be applied, the church said, "Don't leave us alone. We'll take care of this.
Hmm.
We've got this because we're the church, and this is what we do to take care of this."
Hmm.
And yet here, there's this open crossover that seems to be going on where the Methodist church isn't taking this on and saying, "Hey, we're the Methodist Church. We take care of these ideals from within." No, it gets very
Hmm.
public. And so here's one of the paragraphs from this AP article that
Okay.
came out in regards to this. It says this: it took decades, and I want to think for a moment, how long has even the idea of religion be around? Religious ideals, worship,
Hmm.
Christianity, Judaism, even Muslim. I
Hmm.
mean, think of how many years they've all been around, Judaism being the oldest of them all.
Hmm.
And now this is a statement made in this AP article. It took decades of activism for a change that was, quote, so very healing, end quote,
Of
said
course.
McAvoy, pastor of Shepherd of the Valley United Methodist Church
Of
in
course.
Hope, Rhode Island, a member of the Queer Delegate Caucus at the last week's United Methodist Church General Conference in Charlotte, and said
Yeah,
she was grateful to be a part of the historic moment. I think this begins to answer some of these questions.
I agree. I think, yeah, significantly, the strange thing about this kind of stuff is this is not a new idea
Right.
by any stretch. Obviously, if you believe the Bible, if you think what the words in that book are true, that's one thing. If you don't think they're true, then perhaps you shouldn't be in that particular religion or even claim that you have that faith. But this was clearly something that the authors of the Bible understood to be coming and delineated it fairly clearly. So that's not saying that I'm better than anyone else or that I'm not going to be judged for my life, like I certainly will be.
Right,
But
right.
it was clear that the author said there's going to be a time when people are going to just believe what they want to believe instead of what the creator has designed and what the creator has called right and wrong. And again, so for me, it's like, okay, if you believe in a creator, you believe that the book has right and wrong in it, and you live that way, great. You're not going to live it perfectly, obviously, but to say that I can change whatever I want to in this book and the creator is on board, um, kind of in a way is saying there is no creator. I am God and I can do and say what I want to do and just make things up on the fly. And certainly there's been plenty of people who have done that in the past. Even the most religious of the religious have done that. All kinds of crazy interpretation, you name it. But that's the weird bedfellow here with these folks. And it has links to kind of a significant push in communism that has happened since the 1930s globally. This is actually a specified thing, a specified target to create a communistic type government system worldwide.
Well, and I think when you say that, I think many of us, when you begin to link, Glenn, when you take that word communism and you link it to the Methodist Church, okay, when you link that to cultural idealism within a religious community, like I don't know that there's any Muslim out there that would take it sitting down for somebody to say,
Right,
"Hey, you know what?
right,
You guys are communistic."
right,
They would go, "Oh, we need to chat." You couldn't there. I don't think there's anybody in the Catholic Church who would take it sitting down if you came up to them and said, your version is communism.
yes,
Um, so when you bring that into the equation, I think you're asking the right question. I think you're stating somewhat of what I think should be the obvious, but I don't think it's so obvious to many people.
right,
People don't think. Well, people go, well, the church is the church, and so when they do it, it's religiously good. But
right,
when we see happen within, especially larger denominational governings of churches like that, when you see happen in that, what is already being fought over in what I might call secular idealism, which
right,
people would like to say or pretend that government is secular, or say there's no influence of religion in government, or if you could say, in Russia right now, if you go over there and say, well, Vladimir Putin has no influence of religion,
right,
um, that would be foolish. That'd be crazy talk to say it's not the case. Or Xi
exactly,
Jinping, if you went over to China and say, well, he is not influenced in anything but knowledge. Or
right,
North
right,
Korea, and you can say, well, he is not influenced by anything but knowledge. Now,
Right.
everybody has a belief system going on. And so it's revealing something. When the Methodist Church is doing this, especially, and I got to say this, years ago, I spoke to an African pastor who had moved from Africa. He was within the United Methodist congregation denomination. He had moved and was pastoring a small church in Iowa. And when I was having a conversation with him after the service, he was talking about how the vote had come, the world vote for the United Methodist Church had come in regards to whether or not there should be gays in the pulpit, LGBT, whatever they want to define themselves. I think the scriptures talk about homosexuality, cross-dressing, and things like this. Those who are effeminate, men who are effeminate in actions intentionally. And he said that when the vote had passed in convention, in regards to this, it was defeated, saying there shouldn't be homosexuals in the pulpit. Now, what he told me though is he said if America had voted alone,
Yeah.
it would have been the other way.
Yeah.
And he said it was the African church of the United Methodists that had their vote not been counted, it would have been accepted back then.
Right.
And so what first caught me about this, and this isn't the first time I heard about this that was going to happen to the Methodist Church. And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not a churchgoer, that's all right. You're listening to the right podcast, because there's an effect that goes on with what's going on between what you're looking at the world, you're looking at religion, and you see what happens within those. There's an effect going on. And this effect is that we're seeing a group of people saying, no, we don't accept the vote. We don't accept the will of the denomination from a fundamental standpoint of what the Bible would say. Its book.
Mm-hmm.
That I think they're supposed to. I think that's the book what I know of John Wesley. And so it was amazing to me to hear this. And this asked the question then what is it that's going on that the whole denomination ended up voting and saying no, but now this is being essentially overturned.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? What is that actually that's going on? I think that's the question we have to ask.
Well, it's very bizarre because it's just another topic in a long list of topics that the quote unquote church is adhering to, which is just very strange because it's most of the time through history there's been fairly solid things that the church has kind of stood on universally. Obviously some theological differences that people have, and the church is by no means a solid institution for the most part. I mean, most of the time we can't even get along with each other, and we're not very loving, and I mean, fill in the blank, it just doesn't. So when people say the church is doing XYZ, I take a big step back and go, okay, what do you mean? Right? I mean, let's take a look at this and see. So there's nobody saying that a person can't choose a certain lifestyle that they wish. That's a freedom they have in the United States. That's not in it. I mean, that's not the issue. There's nothing going along with that. But why the press for this? And it's kind of like in Illinois, all the laws that these people are passing and writing up and passing quickly here, none of their constituents are wanting. So the people of Illinois are not writing their legislators and saying, hey, listen, this is what we'd like for our community. None of that. It seems to be coming from somewhere else, and it seems to be on the top of the docket is absolutely necessary, even though the constituents and your voting base doesn't want it at all. And this is the trend universally. And so why not the church? It seems to be, if you look at these subjects, right, just across the board, the federal government, the state government, the governors, the mayors, politics, corporations, movie companies, and the church. Right. And amazingly, they all have the same exact agenda going on. Why? Because they're all big happy family, or because no, there's obviously something more going on, and it's not by a group of people that are well-wishers on humanity. Right. It is nothing of the sort. And to see the church getting kind of sucked into this, instead of just holding firm kind of as a moral compass and say, hey, listen, no, there's more than just materialism. There's more than just self-satisfiedness and sensuality. There's more than that. There's a God that requires things of us, and we need to kind of put our flag down here and say, we're going to stand for that. Instead, they have been heavily infiltrated just to go along with the culture. So they're not really a church anymore, any more than Hollywood or any large corporation is. They're not at all. They're doing what they're told to do from some other source. And I've got my ideas, and I'm sure a lot of people do. But that should be the part that bothers people. If you're religious, if you're not religious, if you're a freedom lover, it should bother you, because what's going on here? Why is this so synchronized?
Right, right. It's synchronized, and it's connecting to other sources. So what's common for the world to talk about as being important has become important to the church to talk about it,
Yeah,
and have their opinions about this, but not take a stand on it. Glenn, it reminds me of the United States in its foundings. One of our founders, and I don't want to misquote, so I'm not going to use which name that I'm not sure it was, stated that this, and many other historians will know better this statement than me. I believe is predicated that for the United States to succeed, it must be on a holy and religious people. And the
correct.
idea is the idea is that first and foremost, an individual person must have a governance system in place inside of them that knows there's something greater than them that
Hmm.
determines what is right and what is wrong.
Yep.
And if that doesn't exist, if that begin to become broken down, if that no longer is a part of, it would seem to me anyway, um, these churches that have all turned to this as being an option, it would seem to me it asks another question: what was the purpose of the church in the first place? And if the purpose of the church was not to shore up that there is a creator who says this is right, this is wrong, if that isn't being shored up in congregations that attend these churches, then their hearts, the purpose of the church is not helping people's hearts continue to stay in a point of self governance that
Hmm.
causes a system like we have in the United States to actually work. So it's twofold. It's not only that when we say, well, part of the problem in this country is that our freedoms are being stolen. Well, I tell people the reason our freedoms are being stolen is because we were free and made the wrong choice instead of we were
Hmm.
free and made the right choice.
Hmm.
And that comes down to the foundation of what people believe. Now, even atheists have a belief. They have a belief system, a limitation of what they would believe is right or what they believe is wrong. But
Hmm.
if that governance, if the church has lost its purpose to actually determine and say, look, and I think for anybody I talk to who's fundamentally God fearing or has some sort of, I'm going to use Christian as the basis. I know there's Muslims out there would like you to think that maybe there's some similarities and there's some dissimilarities, and I'm not speaking to those on purpose today. That's not the point of this conversation. But what I want to say is most Christians that you talk to have this fundamental understanding is that one, God, you hear everybody say, there's the 10 commandments. They'll
Hmm.
all say it, right? There's
Hmm.
okay, that's fine. There they are. They're listed. It tells us that basically we're inherently not good, right?
Hmm.
So who can live up to that as that's there. And
Hmm.
then they say, well, the story though includes this guy, and it's like the gospel. So there's a savior. He comes, and he's Jesus, and he helps people to be right with God. And there's a fundamental understanding there. They say this, they would understand. Yeah, there's Jesus, and he's in the story. And I'm saying on a broad scope. I already know what I think, but many people would say this is a fundamental idea. And the thing is if that's not reinforced, if the church's purpose was to teach what is right and what's wrong and how you need a higher governing official in yourself than yourself,
Hmm.
um, if they're not actually teaching that, then something else is influencing the church to become a social ideal.
Hmm.
And also somehow it's been taken apart to think that now you and I can come up with what's right and what's wrong. And now it's up for public debate. And so now people's hearts, I think the church, it seems to me, most denominations have not done the job, which is to challenge people to the grace of God and the holiness of God, what's true, what's right, and what's good. And
Hmm.
and when we're not challenged in that, then we become subjective. And then when people start living a lower standard, their mind starts to feel bad, and then they feel bad about what they've done, but then they justify what they've done instead of go back to the idea of the church, which is to say, hey, that was wrong, and there's love for that, and there's forgiveness for that, so that you can keep pressing on towards
Mm.
what is right.
Right.
And the church doesn't, I don't think the church is indicating that message very well, because now people feel, I think the word is condemned. So then they feel condemned in their mind. So instead of looking to what is right and kindness and grace and love, they go, well, my neighbor does this too. And
Hmm.
we're going to let this be acceptable at some level. Now, for
Hmm.
decades, I think this is what has actually happened to get us to this,
Hmm.
what we're seeing right here, right now.
And a lot of it is our own choice. You know, and I'm certainly not a doctorate in history, but I read a lot, and a lot of people will say that too. Well, I read a lot too, but for sure, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the things that the forefathers of this country put together was the idea that you were understood that you were answerable to God first, and they didn't
Right.
even delineate a religion. Obviously, most of those values came from the Judeo-Christian system, which was here's the Ten Commandments, here's God, here's who He is, the biblical notion of who God is, how to follow Him. But the idea was you're answerable to Him. So, only purpose for a government at all was just to make sure that you were going to be able to live free and to protect those freedoms, knowing
Right.
that everybody would be answerable to God and they'd live accordingly. So if you think that you're answerable to God, in fact, I heard a Charlie Kirk presentation not too long ago that said just that. If you were walking into the mall and you knew a law enforcement officer was walking in there with you, how would you behave? Or if he wasn't there, how would you behave? Oh, obviously, me
Right.
too. I'd act a lot different if I had a law enforcement officer there, and not in a bad way. I just know that I would be held accountable for whatever I did. And
Right.
back when the forefathers put this together, as Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. Simply meaning, will people continue to follow God in such a way that they'll realize they're answerable to Him, or will they reject that notion like we do today, which is preached from the highest mountains in education and politics here? You're not answerable for what you do. It's a
Right.
staple now of the American culture. So what does that do? It compromises the safety of the culture and creates chaos. And
Right.
chaos is a great place to go if you want another government system to come in and take over. Even the fact
Yeah.
that we even have political discussions about, oh, well, I hope Donald Trump gets elected so he can do this, this, and this. The forefathers didn't create a kingdom with a king.
Right.
That is
Right.
not the idea. I mean, yes, he can sign bills, and yes, he can do some of those things. But originally, no, he's not a king. We don't want a king. They explicitly said that. In fact, I even
Right.
heard a good sermon that you taught once about when the Israelis wanted a king, they got a king, and it didn't turn out so well. Excuse me, the Jewish culture back in the day. So that's not at all it. And so everything that we see that is coming along with this, from the Methodist Church to corporations to government, is they're all saying there is no accountability. Well, doesn't the Bible say that might not be the right thing to do? No, you can do whatever you want. There's no accountability. Well, maybe we shouldn't. The Catholic Church wrestles with this. Maybe you shouldn't commit abortion. I know they're very divided on this. And one
Right.
portion of the Catholic Church, including the Pope, is saying, no, don't worry about it. There's no accountability. You'll never answer to God for doing that. And so
Right.
here we're devolving into this chaotic culture where the more and more people that don't find that they're accountable to God feel more and more freedom to do what they please. And the chaos factor just ratcheted it up.
Right. Right. And when the chaos factor is ratcheted up like that, well, we begin to see, there used to be a day very distinctly, I think, where people said, that people would be more nervous about being around those who were maybe churchgoers. And
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be this unique thread going on. I think maybe you've seen it too, and I think maybe others who are listening to the podcast may see it. But again, in particular to the listener of this podcast today, if you're not, that's fine. If you're not particularly churchgoer, what we're trying to talk about today is this. This is a thread we're seeing tying throughout a world society.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it with some would call it a pandemic. I'm not sure I agree with that overall. But what we saw is this connectivity with people that was assumed that everybody's going like, oh, look, it matters what I decide because of the response of the whole globe. And
Mm-hmm.
so, which actually, so if you're using the global standard now, okay, what I do or don't do is important for the governance of this globe instead for the governance of a God who says what is right or wrong, and we start
Mm-hmm.
doing that, then the chaos ensues. And we as people are usually weaker than we are stronger, especially when there's fear in place. And
Mm-hmm.
when fear is in place, we look for a solution. And when mankind's government shows up and says, hey, we got the solution, and it's subtle and it's in the name of power, they slide it in. And instead of going, hey, we need to turn to God and find out what's right or wrong, instead of that God honoring aspect, we turn to the other, and then we feel a certain amount of relief. But now we've given up the what you're born to be, which is free, even in your humanness, because of the likeness you've been made in a creator. And so we see this happen. So now, the churches don't want to create issues. But it seems to me, Glenn, one of the questions that's being answered here is, why do the churches beginning to go against the Bible they use as being some sort of standard? And if they're going to go, if the Pope is even saying so, if the Methodist Church is saying so, and according to this article, let me read this other portion. It looks like other churches are involved in this too. It says, these reversals can be seen as marking the end of a half a century of epic battles and schisms over LGBTQ involvement, not
Mm-hmm.
only in the United Methodist Church, but in U.S. mainline Protestant denominations overall. Those are
Mm-hmm.
tall, steeple churches in a myriad town squares and rural crossroads, traditionally big tent, culturally mainstream congregations, some
Mm-hmm.
predating America's independence. So it includes the Presbyterian, the Episcopal, the Lutheran denominations, have all now removed the barriers, they're saying. And of course, they're writing as if this is a great joy. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what is the church doing? And this is the question. I think you've asked it very well. And I want to restate this because we need to ask why the church is setting down its foundation to get involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
What's the real question here? What's the end game for a church that would do this? What are your thoughts on that, Glenn? What is the end game? Why would the church begin to give up what it is truly believed? For what purpose?
Well, if I wanted to take down a free culture, or a democratic republic like we have here in the United States, I would go about it by first knocking out any moral compass that country might have, any foundation, any strong families, any strong folks that believe in the Lord, any strong patriots. I'd go after that first to knock it down so that we could kind of sweep things along and be on our way to the next step. This was actually very talked about by William Z. Foster, who was in the Communist Party in the 1930s and understood this fully, was a member of the Communist Party USA at the time, and actually, you know, admitted this, and under trial he had some other things go on, but he wrote a book about it some time ago, and he explained that these were open goals of communism to go after the West, capital W, Europe, the United States, that type of thing. And so what we're kind of seeing fleshed out here is these goals to push this agenda to knock things down subtly over time, rather than going face to face with a very strong country or countries in battle. Let's corrupt them societally. So a nice combination, in my opinion. This is purely my opinion. They've been pounding this for a while. I know that the schools were heavily affected in the 60s and
Yep.
the 70s by this type of ideology. Now, the ideology itself, communism itself, just a template, is not the problem. The problem is people capitulating on their trust in God and their honor and their moral code, all those things that in the United States when it first came, they expected us to stick to. So we have personally
Right.
given up all of these things because the culture has kind of given us a pass rather than standing up. So as we do this, we're passing this down to the next generation. And now you're going to pay $60,000, $70,000 a year to go to a public university where they're just going to flat obliterate it. Any notion that you've got any type of accountability or any type of honor is going to be completely wiped out. And it's been going like that for decades and decades. And so the church is now a part of that. And I hate to use the word church because I think if God himself was to come down here and look, I think he'd be rubbing his chin. I'm not sure what you mean by church. You mean a building over there with some people and it looks like Amazon. What's the difference? And the church was actually one of the highest points of attack that these types of people were interested in by degrading the West. And I've actually got a quote here that you might find interesting, if I can just find it again. This was
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
a book, and I've read this quote too. I know a lot of guys have heard this quote before, but I think it bears repeating because these were goals that the Communist Party was actively pursuing in the 1950s. And these goals recorded by Cleon Skousen. Again, William Z. Foster had a whole book out about these goals. These were the things they were looking for in the 30s. And so here's two of them back to back goals, 1950s. Here's back to back. There's a bunch of them. I'm just going to read two. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as, quote, normal, natural, and healthy. That's not my words. That's Cleon Skousen, Naked Communist. You can buy it online at Amazon. The very next thing, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. And here's another one interesting.
Right.
Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principles of separation of church and state.
Right.
So when I read the headlines about the Methodist Church, I go, oh, well done. I mean, the Communist Party's got another notch in their belt.
Right.
And they just keep pressing through. And so now the question is why? Why, if you're on the Titanic and the captain keeps running the boat into an iceberg, you're going to have to step back and go, okay, why is he doing this? Why does he keep doing this? This isn't good. This could be a problem for everybody. And it doesn't matter what political party you're on. When that thing goes down, everybody's going to suffer. And that's kind of the position that we're in. And so to see these goals so clearly delineated from so long ago, and we're seeing them played out literally day by day with these interesting expressions that this is freedom and liberation and this is just going to be this utopia, which there has never been in any communist scheme or socialist scheme.
Nope.
People should just be deeply concerned at the outcome of this, because the Gulag and the camps in Siberia, they don't care what your sexual preference is. They don't care what your religion is. When they've had enough of you, you're all done.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think it begs the question that the importance of people wanting to be on what I want to call, for today's intent and purposes, I want to call it the right side. I don't know if you remember, but when we went to school, they used to teach us, don't bow or take a knee to peer pressure. And they used to say, you're an individual. You have individuals, do what's right in your heart. Do what's right in your heart. And now they say, do what's right in your heart, but they're doing it to people that won't let other people's hearts do what's right in them. And what begins to happen is that we begin to bow to the peer pressure of it all. But I think there's a reason past, and this might not be pleasant to talk about. I'm sure it's not. There's a reason we're willing to bow to peer pressure, is we want to be a part of what is right. But I think more dangerously, or what is good or deemed good by a larger group of people. By the way, this is where democracy does not work, where when you have a supposed majority, and that's to be proven yet in any of this, that there's actually a majority going on. It's always a minority with what's wrong screaming the loudest to get this done. But what happens is people start to feel guilty in their own lives. This comes right back to the home. We have stopped governing our own hearts. And I don't care if you carry a six-shooter. I don't care if you wear a cowboy hat. I don't care if you voted Trump and you're going to vote for Trump again. I don't care who you are. If you don't have a moral compass that's subject to the highest authority, one who creates planets, if you don't do that, you too are seeking power. And that's a problem across the board, because when you look at the two-party system, and that's what we have in this country really is a two-party system, it has nothing. We have two parties. Both of them are trying to say, hey, we are the ones that represent God. We're the ones that have the moral. Our side is showing you the moral side of all this. And the problem with that is then that's to obtain more votes, which people begin to have a lust for power. And that's Christians, Muslims, Jews. It could be Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, independents, you name it. People just want to be right. And if we're willing to admit it, we want to be with the group that has the power. And ultimately, it draws a higher quantity of people in, and apparently churches who want to be involved in a larger structure of power, including, and this is one of the most dangerous words being thrown around now, global. Oh, we want to be a part of what is globally correct. Well, to do that, you have to walk away from what is independently right by a creator. Because if you're talking about global, we want to be a part of the group that does what's right by the whole globe of this earth. Well,
Mm-hmm.
the only way to do that is to come to the one who has all the power over the earth. But we won't do
Mm-hmm.
that. We just want to if we pretend there's no God at all, if we pretend there's no right and wrong, then we go, hey, or here's my favorite lie, hey, God is real, but He's given it to us to govern.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize He created the earth and then said, hey, you guys get this all figured out over the next 80 billion years. And then there's a religion saying, we'll get everything figured out and we have an obligation to live our lives today to do these things that have no moral relevance to the scriptures,
Right.
and then pretend that we're doing a moral thing that's going to pan out in a million years from now because we don't even believe
Right.
there's an eternity anymore. This
Right.
is a global religious ideal. I don't care who you
Oh,
are. This is a global religious ideal. And if you think government and religion are separate, you are incorrect in thinking that,
right.
because everybody
True.
wants to seek power. You either serve the authority that's over you, or you just want to be a part of the power. And so we start voting because we want to be on the side that's right instead
Mm-hmm.
of doing what's right. And so you will see it both sides, both parties. I mean, while we're pointing at at gays being in the pulpits, we can go, oh, we can blame it on Democrats. You can blame it on a lot of things. I have a tendency to blame it on these church structures and their leaders who have
Mm-hmm.
said, we
Mm-hmm.
people are the ones who need to be governing, instead of actually open up the Bible and say, and I think it says in there somewhere that God is the governor, God is the king. And when churches start
Mm-hmm.
saying something else, we're looking for accolades. We're looking for superiority. And the church wants a seat at the table. And if it's ever seen that the church
Right.
isn't going to be a part of that worldly seat of the table, be you Catholic, Lutheran, Methodist, Protestant, AG, Baptist, whoever you are, if you're seeking a seat at the table, this is a part of the problem. You're leaving what you believe. And this is an example. This article and what's going on with the Methodist Church is yet another example of them needing to be actually a part of a larger scale of, hey, you know what? We're doing what's right now in the eyes of many, when it's really only in the eyes of few. And the many are
Right.
not engaging. The many are not engaging because their own hearts have not come to their own belief, which they used to believe when they read their
Mm.
Bible or prayed. And they're not standing up because they have become weak. And now they're like, yeah, I'm just not going to get involved. And I think that's a problem.
Right.
As you
Well,
know, I enjoy Metaxas, Eric Metaxas, and I'm continuing to read
oh
Bonhoeffer.
yeah.
It's quite a work, and this is a quote from Bonhoeffer, who knew very well. Again, I'm not a great historian, but I can read, and I want people who are listening to
Mm-hmm.
this too to know that you don't have to have a high education, but you do want to enjoy looking for yourself where the truths are. If the
Mm-hmm.
news is reporting it, look where the truths are. Learn to ask the questions. Start getting the information yourself. So I'm reading this book, and I think this applies very well, because the church, then what happens is those who think they are serving the Lord greater go, well, the most important thing is that we love and we don't get angry, because we'll be accused of being angry. If you say, hey, you know what, this is that lifestyle you're doing, that's wrong. The finger's pointed at you,
Mm.
and you go, oh, you're an anger monger. You have hatred in your heart. And so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
those people who trust or believe in God have a tendency to kowtow and back off instead of get engaged. And I think Dietrich
Mm-hmm.
Bonhoeffer, who gave his life for this cause, said it very well in this quote. He said, "It is high time we broke with our theology based restraint towards the state's actions, which, after all, is only fear." Who in the
Mm.
church realizes today that this is the very least that the Bible requires of us?
Mm-hmm.
So here's a guy who goes, at what point? He's saying you need to break away from your theology of, you know what, we're just supposed to be quiet. We're just supposed to pray for our government. And we're just supposed to, we're not supposed to speak out. And we're not supposed, this is where this is occurring. And the
Mm.
communism manifesto knows this. If you can destroy the
Mm-hmm.
morality, if you can get into the church, if you can get into the family, then what we'll do is we'll get them to stop talking, and we, in our own
Mm-hmm.
form of morality, will rule, and it'll make this a better place.
Mm-hmm. Well, and history bears out that Bonhoeffer never saw any good outcome in his life.
Right.
He stood up against this his whole life and finally died before the Nazis lost the war. Never seen any victory that had come out of that. Obviously there was some, and he was
Right.
a very influential man. He is today with his writing. This is very influential. This is not. I know a lot of people. Well, this is your idea. This is my idea. It's like it's gravity. Gravity doesn't care who you are. Don't jump off the cliff. It's not going to go
Yep.
well for you. It's just not. And so when people say, "Well, you're just you're a hate monger," or whatever, it's like, no, I don't care how you live your life. You're going to answer to God for it, and so
Yep.
am I. And you just need to know that. And I'll move on to the next thing. I'm certainly not a superhero that's telling everybody what to do and how to do it, but I'm also analytical enough to know when we're in big trouble. As
Yep.
a nation, as a free people, I talk with people from. I've been to communist countries. I've been to Cuba. I've been to Venezuela. I'll call Venezuela communist. I've been to China. It is not at all like the United States, and all those expatriates that come from those countries that I do associate with, particularly in Florida and other places, they are terrified of what they see. They're
Yes.
terrified, and they're seeing the religious aspects dwindling. The moral compass is going upside down. They're seeing the financial crisis that's coming. They're seeing how government's getting more and more overreaching, how the Constitution is getting more and more compromised. And these people have seen it before. And so when I talk to them, personally, one-on-one, they're like, we don't want this. This is a terrible thing to do for everybody involved. And that's what people don't understand. When these communistic regimes finally go to full fruition, everybody that party doesn't like pays a price. It doesn't matter if you supported them before or
Yep.
after. If you help them get there, you're going to pay a steep, steep price. And once that line is crossed, you're not going back. And up to now, we at least had free countries that could fight back a little bit and try to provide freedom. When the West goes down, that's not an option anymore.
Right.
It's
Right.
checkmate.
Yep. That's right. That's right. And where there used to be an influence, and when you talk about morality, if you can attack a moral code, if you can disrupt a moral code, if you can destroy a moral code,
Mm.
the wrong exchange has been that they're saying we have a morality, and the morality is love.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, but they don't define love. They don't define what the definition of that. They don't define the boundaries of that,
No.
and yet have the audacity to still call other people's criminals. So it's amazing to me that the highest morality is to love, but not know where the boundaries are.
Right.
And if you're a parent at all, you know that if your kid, like you said, Glenn, if your kid jumps off a cliff, the law of gravity doesn't care what they've done.
No.
And if you're a parent and you just, while they're falling to their death, you go, you know what though, I'm a moral person because I loved them.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a good person at all.
Mm-mm.
And I'm making that judgment right here on the program. You are not a good parent if you love your children while they do wrong, while you say nothing.
Yep.
And it's going to be the same for us. It's going to be the same for people who know the difference between right and wrong, and they see what's going on, and they're trying to pull apart any influence that would happen in regards to this. And what's interesting is, and reading another part of this article, Glenn, this is interesting. They say all this has happened with the Presbyterian, Episcopal, Lutheran Church, Methodists. I know the AG is talking about it. Who knows about the Baptist denomination, right? We
Mm.
all want to think we're right. And when we all want to think we're right, and this is, I'm going to say this is one of the biggest mistakes with being involved with a denomination, because
Mm.
then you get involved in a power struggle and say, well, our denomination, I don't care. God doesn't care.
Mm.
There won't
Mm.
be a Catholic, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, AG or Pentecostal in heaven. There won't be one, because the Bible doesn't preach that ever. God's standards never said those denominations or anybody with that idea or a label as such is going to be there. It's just going to be people, I believe, last time I read, who believed in Jesus, God's Son, and believed in Jesus's work for their own personal sin. That's what
That's
that
it.
was. And that's all that's going to be there. And what's interesting is all this is happening within these denominations. And the article finishes by saying all of this comes amid long-term declines in membership and influence. So here you have it. You have churches struggling for money, so they go to the government.
Mm-hmm.
To do what? A program they want to do. Well, where's that in the Bible? Nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Churches are struggling because they feel they need to have people in the chairs, so they have somebody to talk to. Oh, you just want power? Because last time I checked, I don't think that's the purpose of the church, is to have it full just so you can have somebody to talk to. And when there's a decline in membership and influence, then it allows others to move in. There's a vacuum where others move in so that they can have what? Influence. Influence. And I think it's self-revealing to all these churches, or to anybody who would say they honor God. It's self-revealing that if you don't take a chance to influence because of the influence of truth in your own life, there's nothing more powerful than somebody saying, "Hey, you know what? That's wrong. You know why I know? Because I did it and it was wrong, and it's a bad way to do it." Or, "I know it's wrong. I'm not here to condemn you, but I would be remiss. I would be unloving to escort you in your wrong instead of say, hey, that's wrong." And so people get squirmish over actually stating, hey, that's incorrect, because the new religious morality is acceptance and tolerance for all things you don't think is right, when even our own country is founded on, hey, if you don't agree, say it. If you don't agree, say it. So how can it be a morality to say, hey, everybody else needs to accept everything, but nobody should be able to say that they disagree? And so we see this totalitarian upbringing, and we see the influence back and forth. And now I think we would have to say, you said it well, communism and church are looking the same.
Oh, they are.
And I would have to say, based on what's happening, what I see happening from a distance, and I'm not a Methodist, I don't go to the Methodist Church. What I'm seeing from a distance is this is a tyrannical move. When you have the will of a governance within the church denomination of the Methodists vote and say no, and they decide, no, we're going to overturn that, that's tyranny. And who would ever have associated the idea of tyranny in a religious community to just start overturning the will of, when people should have the freedom to say, no, this is wrong. And what I think is going to happen is you're going to fill these religious institutions with people who believe in your new morality of tolerance, and you will have people leave and find other people and say, you know what? I think I actually believe in God who created earth, and I'd like to live I would like to submit myself within a group of people to say, you know what? I believe in being accountable for moral things.
Yep.
But people don't want to be accountable for moral things, and conservatives don't want to be accountable for moral things. I mean, shoot, Glenn, 9/11 happened. I voted for the guy who was the president at that time. And you know what he said? Islam and Christians serve the same God. And yet when you read the Christian God, the name's not the same. And that same guy said, you know what? We should crawl inside everybody's house for free and spy on them. And I'm thinking, what did I do? What did I just do? What has happened here? And you know what? They made the same argument. I'm going back on this. They made the same argument. Look, it's for your protection.
Yep.
We are here to protect you. We just got to take a little bit more freedom. The church is going, hey, we're here for you, regardless of what you do, no matter how wrong it is. It's for your good. We want to help you do this. And the government just wants to gain control, and they want to gain the populace to obtain that. And the church wants to be the popular one. How are they going to finally maintain this power? Well, they're going to accept everything, because maybe that'll get everybody in the door. Well, that doesn't get them in the door except for a purpose of an ideal that no longer exists within those congregations, which is what a church is, what a church's purpose is, who it is who's actually in charge of the church, and who the people are in those ministries, and what they're actually supposed to do within that congregation. That's all been exchanged. And you said it good in Romans chapter 1. I don't know if you got that in front of you or not, but that says it pretty darn well, I think, in regards to this.
Yeah, it does. And the leaders of, quote unquote, of some of these churches, it's not like their churches are flourishing. It's not like this is a great idea and all of a sudden they're growing. And that's kind of the insidious thing that goes on here, is people rightly interpret this as, okay, well, if there's no right or wrong, I'm just going to go golf on Sunday morning. And they'd be right to. If you're going to join a club, you might as well join the golf club, at least go have some fun on the golf course. And so we're seeing a lot of these, quote unquote denominations beginning to decline in the numbers of people that go there because because why would you go? It's
Right.
we're going to go to the library, but there's no books there. Well, why would I go to the library?
Right.
What they're supposed to stand for doesn't exist anymore. By and large, not everybody. I'm not making that assertion at all. But if the rank and file American would stand up and say, "I'm accountable to God.
Yep.
I'm going to disciple and be discipled. I'm going to love others as Christ did, not as the universities tell you to.
Yep.
I'm going to serve. It's going to cost me something to serve Him." It would be an entirely different thing, and that person would not be easily swayed. The
Right.
person that doesn't do those things, which is by and large the majority of Americans, they are easily swayed. And whatever the next wind blowing is, they're good to go. And so, for all intensive reasons, you really have no moral code whatsoever, except
Right.
what's popular in the culture.
Right. Right. I think it's an answer to this, and for our listeners too. I think a question we have as we're wrapping this kind of together here, Glenn, a question that we have to ask people, and when it at the opportune time that you're listening to this podcast, I hope you hear this question, because we're talking about ideals that are going on within the United Methodist Church that have happened recently. We're talking about what goes on with government, and I think we can all get caught up in because our goal here is not to ridicule what's going on in the church, but ask the questions. Why? Why is this going on? And I think I think only people who are brave enough after listening to this podcast or to get up and think about this for a minute, go look in the mirror and go, what role have I played in my heart being like what is going on there? Because it's not going to happen another way. We can
No.
always rally the masses by coming up with a common thread, but the bottom line is within the hearts of individuals, and we talked about it at the beginning, if there's no self-governance going on, if there's no requirement upon ourselves, and we're too proud to admit the things we do wrong, then we're going to be relinquished to thinking all there is on this earth is a war between good and evil, instead of a resolve for that which is right and that which is not. And this is really not a war of good and evil. This is really determining if there's something called the truth, and it is in fact right. And even in listening to this, you need to consider for yourself if you are if you're a married individual, if you're a youth, if you're somebody who's older like we are, and you're considering some of these later days in your life and you're getting into it, are you willing to look into the mirror and say, you know what? I think everything that's going on is terrible, but do I think that my own life is living up to what I'm being disgruntled? It's disgruntling to me, because that's what I would consider a grassroots faith, is being willing to look at oneself and go, man, I am participant in some way. I'm a participant, even if it means you're not speaking out. And, Christians will struggle forever because the process for the believer, for the Christian individual, is that they're being changed, and they'll always accept the condemnation of the world and say, see, you're no different than I am. Well, it takes a certain amount of humility to look in the mirror and say, you know what, that is true, but the process of this is different. I will still hold on that there is something that is right, and a huge price has been paid that I would believe in that. And are we walking in that now? And it's not, there's no secret. This isn't the Republicans. They're not the saviors. This isn't the Democrats. They're not the saviors.
No.
They have never been and never will be a savior. This isn't the churches. They're not the saviors. This is larger than that. It has to do with exactly the truth of your own life and the choices you're making. And you need to understand that's your belief system if you're actually doing those things. And people struggle with standing up for what is right because they're struggling with doing what is right. And it begins there, I think. And we all have to take a deep breath and go, it does begin with me first. And then what do I need to do that is right? And this younger generation comes up. They need us. I love the way you talk about this, Glenn. Maybe you explain a little bit. We have a responsibility, this older generation, to do something as we head out for them. Tell me a little bit more when you talk about that. What you mean by that for us old codgers?
Well, a lot of us when we get older, we just think, okay, we're done. All of our contributions are complete. Nothing more to add. Nothing more to do. But more times than not, in history, it was the older guys that had seen a little bit of life and saw the direction that things were going that said, hey, listen, maybe I will pay a price for my kids and my grandkids and for my country, so that they have the best possible opportunity to not have to make the hard decisions in the future. Maybe I will be the one that teaches them about redemption that the Lord offers. Maybe I will be the one that shows them by example how to love our neighbor and how to sacrifice on behalf of another. Maybe I will be the one that just says, I've been pushed far enough. This is all the farther I'm getting pushed, and I'm planting my flag right here, and we're done. Do it.
Yeah.
Do with me what you want. I've got nothing really left to do, and we should do that with kindness, with humility, with concern for the future, with love for our kids, our grandkids, those that are around us, with compassion for those that need compassion. And I mean all the way across the board, not just church members, not just Christians, but those that need it. And if the Holy Spirit of God is telling us to do something, whatever that is, to say or do, we should do that something, whatever that is, to say or do, because the times are getting kind of dark. I've heard one guy say it's getting kind of late in the day.
Yeah.
And so we can't really keep walking like we are. And we have to stand up, and we just have to do it in a godly way.
Yep. No, absolutely. Glenn, I pulled up Romans chapter 1. And for our listeners, that's a book in the Bible. It's pretty cool.
Yes.
And if you've never read it before and you've never picked up a Bible in your life, I'm going to suggest maybe you grab one and read this chapter. It's pretty cool. Romans chapter 1. And it says, for since the creation, verse 20, for since the creation of the world, I want to use this to summarize our conversation today. God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, being understood by what has been created, so that those people are without excuse.
Mm.
For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks,
Yep.
but they became futile in their reasonings, and their senseless hearts they were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of an incorruptible God for an image of corruptible mankind, of birds, four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. Therefore, it says, God gave them up to vile impurity in the lusts of their own hearts. That's why we talk about that, Glenn. We got to look at our own hearts, for the lusts of their hearts, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them, exchanging the truth of God for falsehood, and worshipped and served creatures rather than the Creator who blessed them. And it says, for this reason, God them gave over to degrading passions. For their women exchanged, and this is the statement of a lesbian relationship sexually. For their women exchanged natural relations for that which was contrary to nature, meaning obvious. And likewise men too abandoned natural relations with women and burned in their desire toward one another, males with males, committing shameful acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. Well, that's a scripture I want to wrap this up with, and I want to say to anybody who's also heard that, who has ever participated in those relationships like that, I want to say something. This conversation isn't around condemning anyone who would do that, because the message of God is in the gospel, which means if you have done any act of sin against God, and the Bible says everybody has, that is why salvation is available. And the opportunity to come to that good work of what's called the gospel, and you will find in that no judgment from creative God by coming to him and saying, you were right, God, I was wrong. Forgive me. And in that place, I tell you, you will find the love of God, and you will meet him face to face. And there he will be with open arms. And now you'll have a heart that can be governed by God. And you too can help see around you in this world, in the Methodist Church, in the Lutheran Church, in the Catholic Church, in the Assemblies of God, you name it, man. When that happens, you can now distribute this great message for the change of lives for people around you too. Jesus said it very well. He said it to the woman caught in the act of adultery. He said, where are your accusers? They're gone. He says, go and sin no more. And I tell you, this is a great life to live, and to be able to stand with other brothers and sisters in the Lord who understand the forgiveness of God. In that forgiveness, you too can live a life of victory, pulling you out of the guilt you feel causing you to go with the masses instead of to go with the love of God, who singularly loved you himself by sending his own son. Glenn, I want to thank you for joining me today. We're going to have many more. Absolutely. Wonderful conversations together. And whenever the next time will be, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. And, bro, we will catch you next time. And for those who are listening, again, this is The Challenge. You can find us on Rumble. You can find us on Facebook. And you can find us on YouTube. And if you want to reach out and get a hold of us, you can do those in those places. Or you can go to our subsidiary ministry, whitedoveministries.net. And there you can reach out, and we'll find you there, too. God bless. You have a good day. And as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Have a good day.